Native Americans do not have afros, as in voluminous hairstyles using tightly coiled, or looser curly hair, but they can, and do have, voluminous hairstyles using wavy hair though. More importantly, none of the Olmec heads found show confirmed afros either. The only claims out there are, out of context, conjecture, not fact. Here's where we explore context, versus Van Sertimus, out of context picture. So what do we really know about Monument F of Tres Zapotes? It is made of basalt, possibly carved with jade tools, which means, the smaller the sculpture, the less fine the details will be. It is much smaller than the colossal heads, and its facial carvings, much more primitive. We have a vague outline of a face and of a possible hairline that ends in what looks like a flat top. The pudgy face is not clearly outlined and the carving is crude. It is in a prone position that could be for sacrifice or indicate that he is a prisoner. We really can only guess. His facial features are actually not like any Nilotic or Niger-Congo populations. The face is much too flat, and the brow line is way too pronounced. If we look at artwork from Nigeria and Benin, we clearly see that peoples in that region did not depict themselves with flat pudgy faces with pronounced brow ridges. We do see similar features with flat faces and pronounced ridges in local Native American populations that also have the broad nose and thick lips, albeit not as pronounced as the crude carving of Monument F. We see much more detailed facial carvings in jade and clay of that era. Monument F does not give us that clarity. We could also claim that Monument F depicts an Australian Aborigine, especially with the pronounced brow ridges, or maybe a Polynesian, but all this would be conjecture. Claiming the hairstyle is an afro without any clear indication of either curly, frizzy or tightly coiled hair patterns is pure conjecture. First we need to figure out if the statue is unique, or if it fits within a pattern. Monument F is a being that protrudes from a block configuration, where the arms and head extend in a prone position. The top of the head actually shows a hollow cavity indicating a possible sacrificial altar. Strike one for the assumption of an afro. Have we seen this configuration before? Yes, Monument G, at Tres Zapotes, and the so-called monkey staring at the sky. Monument G is very deteriorated, but monkey is not. Monkey clearly shows a similar prone position, once it has been laid down, and similar flat top with a widow's peak. So is monkey really an African man as claimed by some? Well, one clear indication he is not human is his ear. It is pointy, like that of a monkey. Anthropomorphic animals have been seen in Olmec art many times before. We are well acquainted with were-jaguars. In fact, a very similar sculpture has been attributed to a were-jaguar. It could be. Were-jaguars are seen everywhere, but looking at so-called monkey looking at the sky, and looking at a few other anthropomorphic figures with similar flat tops, protruding mouths and widow's peak hairlines, we may be looking at anthropomorphic monkeys as well. After all, we have no idea how the Olmec would have visualized humanized monkeys, but we do know many variations of how we have envisioned them ourselves, and a crude translation of any of them to a basalt carving could produce similar sculptures. Even if the Olmec were trying to just depict a human, how can we be sure a widow's peak in a crude sculpture is somehow an afro? Widow's peaks do occur in some Native Americans, so how would you depict those widow's peaks in a crude basalt carving? Furthermore, we have depictions that clearly show both the broad features, the widow's peak and straight-haired ponytail sprouts sticking out. Ultimately, people are just making guesses based on superficial similarities. Occam's razor still rules. If local explanations fit, why go to another continent to find an explanation, unless you are ethnocentrically biased? If I were Afrocentric, I could find much better sculptures to make superficial claims. With narrower, more West African art-looking faces, they would still be explainable by polytopicity, as Dr. Shomark Okeda pointed out in my other video.
The idea that physical similarity will always track with relationship is what we're trying to get. I'm trying to dispel you of that notion, because it's not always true. And so there's sometimes people who may look very similar, or when you measure certain things, they may appear to be similar based on the math, but in actual fact, using other measures and other kinds of information, you know that that can't possibly be true. You know, so when I go down to, when I go up to, you know, when I go to some village in the Sudan and I say, that guy looks just like guy at the conference in London, I mean, they must be, oh, no, it's not your twin brother. You know, it's an accident. It's an accident. There is something in physical anthropology and evolutionary biology called polytopicity. And polytopicity was a problem for early evolutionary biologists who were interested in taxonomy and classification. Why? Because polytopicity refers to the fact that you have similar looking groups of organisms, or you have a group of organisms in one place that looks very similar to another group of organisms in another in terms of whether it was their wing shape, their morphology, in terms of things you can measure. But the dilemma was, should you group these things together when one was 10,000 miles away from the other and there was no way that one got from one place to the other? In other words, they were not closely historically connected. So it's called polytopicity. It's one of the problems with the subspecies concept for zoologists, and the subspecies concept in zoology is the same as the race idea for human beings. Only with human beings there's even more problems than there were for the zoologists. Problem of classification. So my human example of polytopicity is certain people from Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea and those places who, for everybody who just sees them on the street, based on your own social experience, you say, oh, these look like Africans. These are Africans. Well, no, they're not. No, they're not. Their lineage DNA says they're not. Where they live says they're not. And their languages definitely put them very far afield. But they live in tropical climates. Modern humans were tropical to begin with. Are these retentions from early migrations? Or are they just reacquisitions of tropical traits? Now, no one can answer that. But their DNA clearly ties them to Asia. I mean, the lineage DNA. All traditional racial studies are deductive. That is to say, they assume that you have some, quote, racial types, well-defined anatomical complexes, sets of physical traits, such that whenever you see an individual who doesn't fit either one, your explanation is that they must be a mixture of the two extremes. Okay? Now, of course, we see people in real life who have one parent from one place and one parent from another place, so it's quite possible that, so we have actually seen people who are that way. But the question is that the explanation in all places and for all time?
So polytopicity can explain many facial similarities. The problem comes when facial features seem like a cross between two different, more well-known, populations. Then racialists, without verifying with genetics, will make claims of admixture. It has happened with the San of South Africa, where Afrikaners claimed them as mixed or colored. It happened with many North African populations where many do not want to recognize them as true Africans. It has happened with many Asian populations, claimed by ethnocentrists from around the globe. And it has happened with many indigenous populations in the Americas where genetics has shown them to just be native and not have any modern African ancestry. Obviously admixture has occurred as well. The trick is not to assume, until you can verify if a population's features occur due to admixture or just environmental adaptation. This is no different than other superficial claims. The obsession with claiming that braids on an Olmec sculpture had to be Ethiopian is a similar example. Let us not forget that there is no evidence of Ethiopians wearing leather helmets, with top-knot style braids coming out the top of the helmet, and that the Egyptian and Nubian braids seen in the art are full-headed. Let us not forget that the oldest braids ever found were in South American mummies. Afrocentrists will make claims that there is no way that Native Americans could have had a braid that was thick like that of a stone sculpture. Let us forget we are speaking of a colossal stone sculpture, so assuming that the braid is actually proportional in thickness is extremely idiotic. We still can see that Native Americans could actually have thick braids or locks. Again, Occam's razor still applies. If Afrocentrists want to really make a credible claim of an African presence in pre-colonial America, they need to show the metal weaponry well known in North to Central Africa, the same hieroglyphs existent in Egypt and Nubia, or the bodies of ancient Native Americans with, not only the facial features, but the elongated tropical body types that most of Africa is known for. While tall natives have existed in the Great Plains and in parts of South America, all Mesoamerican remains have been of short peoples, and, furthermore, none of the pre-Columbian remains in the Americas have shown African, elongated limb, body types, superficial facial, or hairstyle. Similarities are not serious evidence of contact, and serious scholars don't dodge away from the serious gaps in the evidence.